Hi, folks. Welcome back to This Week, where we're having real conversations with the people shifting the ground beneath California politics, one story at a time. Today's guest is Teczon Gamero. Alex is a social impact entrepreneur and multidisciplinary creative based in North Hollywood. He's got a deep love for history, philosophy, and storytelling, but what really makes his voice stand out is how he came to conservative values through his own personal journey. I met Alex through Tony Rodriguez, and from the jump, it was clear he wasn't just another young guy going through the motions. He's thoughtful, he's sharp, and not afraid to challenge the narrative. He's also a former varsity volleyball standout, a music producer, and someone who blends creativity with real-world insight. His perspective as a young Latino conservative in Los Angeles is exactly the kind of voice we need more of right now. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome, Alex.
How's it going, Dennis? Thanks for having me today.
Good. We were just chatting before this. Alex had an eventful day. He went to the gun store for the first time.
Yes, I did.
How was that?
It was awesome. So I recently met a friend. He works at Gun World here in Burbank, and I've never seen so many guns before.
Yeah.
And I actually got to hold a pistol for the first time.
How was that?
It was awesome. It felt nice. I'm going to work on my FSE so then I can purchase a gun and I can start taking classes so I can have the skills to shoot a gun. I think it's essential, yeah.
Yeah, I do too. You were talking about how difficult it is to have access to guns in California.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, my friend told me comparing the laws to other states, and California is among the strictest ones. It just seems like they make the process of getting a gun as tedious as possible. I mean, even simply purchasing it, my friend told me that once you purchase it, you can't just walk away with the gun. You have to wait 10 days. You have to come back to the store 10 days to get the gun.
10 days later, I didn't know that.
And the purpose of that is so people have enough time to reflect that they're not going to kill themselves or they're going to do a mass shooting within those 10 days. They're
taking these extreme cases and using it to just base legislation that applies to everybody. You look percentage-wise, yes, this happens, but what does it break down percentage-wise? Maybe a couple of percent, maybe like 2-3%. Obviously, it's tragic. You don't want that to happen, but we live in a one-party rule Democrat state. So obviously they're going to do this kind of stuff and get away with it with zero pushback because, there are no Republicans to say something.
And it's actually it's a deeper problem. We can talk about, banning guns and blaming guns, but at the end of the day, it's people,
Yeah.
I mean, we have knives to cook, right?
Exactly.
But you can kill people with a knife or a hammer or any tool,
It's a good example that you say this because, there are countries like the UK where they have banned all guns and access to guns. And what do they have now? They have a spree of knife attacks. So that's what people like. Then, like you said, it's the person. It's not the weapon. And, what are you going to do? Ban knives? You're going to get spoon attacks. Yeah. So it can be a little difficult to do that, but...
I mean, we got our hands too. You can kill someone just by choking them. So what? We're gonna chop off our hands at some point. Like it won't solve the real issue, which is I think it's pointing to a morality issue, a mental health issue. Just people are in a place where there's violence, and we have to ask why.
Yeah, and I think you hit it in the head. The morality thing. I think it's a huge decrease in faith. People walking away from God, from those values, and even bringing it back to that. Even in the Bible, you see a version of it. How much it's about character rather than the weapon itself. Cain and Abel. Right. I saw a meme about this. It was Cain had a rock. He still did it. He didn't need a gun. He had a rock. So it goes down to the character, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, like, I think that the further we stray away from the church, those values, the more we're going to see this kind of stuff and people trying to blame everything except the one thing that would bring us all together and kind of like ground us. because we've had freedom to have guns since the country was founded, and this is a relatively new problem. I don't have the statistics like the graph in front of me, but I bet that if somebody did a study to see the decrease in people going to church and the increase in gun violence, I bet that there's some kind of correlation on there.
That would be a very interesting study.
Yeah, just see the wave going like that.
Yeah. You know, the other thing is the narrative around guns, because even guns themselves, I carried the gun in my hand for the first time today. And I was a little nervous, right? And it wasn't even loaded or anything, but it's just because there's this fear behind guns. And I think if we start having a conversation about what this is, being responsible about it, it doesn't have to be this very evil thing.
Yeah.
But because of the propaganda against it, it feels uncomfortable, the idea of holding a weapon.
Yeah, well, I think that feeling is pretty normal. I think that feeling does, I mean, I can't speak for most people, but I don't think that feeling really goes away from most people unless you're like in a warlike scenario and you have to like every day. But I've spoken to soldiers and they feel that every time they had to go to the battlefield, or, you know, the first time they had to take a life on, you know. I spoke to a guy who was in the Battle of Fallujah, which was like a siege that lasted, I think, like 3 or 4 days, and he was up for hours. And that was when he had his first like kill, and he said that it was like, you know, it kind of happened like in a quick moment, but it like changed his life forever, like the way he saw like everything. But you know, I've shot guns as well. I've gone to a gun range, and it definitely, like, you do feel the weight of that. You feel the weight of like, I have something that with the smallest action, I can take somebody's life, right? It could even go beyond of like the intent of doing it. It could be a mistake, right? Something just happens, a freak accident. All of a sudden, you know, you've taken somebody's life, or you've changed somebody's life permanently forever, you know, with the smallest thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think that what you were hitting on of like just treating it with more, thinking of like the conversation being more about responsibility, personal responsibility, which is like an American value, right?
Yeah,
rather than like, oh yeah, no, the government will take over this and be the nanny for you, you know?
I really am a believer of educating yourself, taking full responsibility for your knowledge and education, because no one else is really going to do that. We already see our public schools are not doing a good job of that. If we can just educate ourselves on the gun, what is it, like the topic of guns, then I think we'll be a lot more safer with it, more responsible with it, and we can shift it towards a more at least neutral or positive light.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the school stuff, because I want to bring it to something, change the topic a little bit. Your experience, you know, from school, how the education system, like you felt the education system guided you in a certain direction. We've talked about this. That's why I'm kind of guiding it in that direction. But if you could just talk about, you know, you grew up in LA, going through the LA school system, you know, how you felt like that guided you, and eventually how you woke up to the conservative movement.
Yeah. I went through the entire public school system since elementary, middle school, all the way to high school. And then from there, I went to CSUN, which is a Cal State here in LA. I realized that the older I got, the more radical my worldview started becoming.
And why is that?
So I'm a believer of the environment, right? And what you consume is what starts to shape your worldview. And, you know, funny enough, this idea of being oppressed because I'm Latino, right? That actually started as young as elementary school.
Interesting.
But it was very, very subtle, right?
Do you remember who said that to you for the first time?
Yeah, it was, I believe it was my first grade teacher.
Really?
First or second grade, one of them.
What
Because
context was that?
It's so weird that I remember this.
Yeah.
But it was during history. Well, in elementary school, the teacher teaches all the subjects, right? But we were learning about the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King Jr., the impact he did, right? What he fought for. And I remember being so inspired. Like, this was one of the first times where the idea of activism and being fighting for something you believe in, right, in your community. I really got drawn by Martin Luther King Jr. And I remember being so like excited about that. And I told my teacher, oh, like, this is so awesome. Like, there was a time where kids in schools like me were separated based off race. And then now, you know, I see I have a black friend here, a white friend, an Asian friend. Like, this is awesome that Martin Luther King Jr. did this, right? That we beat racism. And my teacher just was like, like, she just sighed.
She's like, I'm not getting through this. The propaganda needs to start now.
So I remember feeling, especially as a kid, it's like I was excited that like we combated and overcame racism.
Yeah.
But my teacher kind of said like, well, you know, we did, but there's still a long road to go. That's kind of how I interpret it as a kid. And I remember feeling a bit sad because...
What did she say specifically? Or do you not remember?
I can't remember. I remember her expression. Yeah, I remember it was... I just remember that's how I perceived it. I can't remember her exact words, but I remember this optimism all of a sudden became kind of sad.
She dimmed it. That's crazy.
And I felt sad of like, oh, maybe we're not fully overcome this, right? So it started there. But in elementary school, I mean, it was my favorite. It was, you know, there was still innocence. I really think about what elementary schools have become. Like, I wonder if they're pushing like the gender stuff on these kids.
Yes, they are.
And that makes me sad because it really feels like they're robbing the innocence of children. And to me, I'm grateful that even though there was those messaging subtly, it never got to the extreme of this gender craziness that's happening.
Yeah.
But
so you felt like that was already a part of like conversations that happened even when you were in elementary school.
Well, that's what started
the gender stuff.
Not the gender stuff. The oppression.
Oppression. Okay.
Yeah, the idea of oppression, because of the color of my skin. So then, I move up to middle school now, and.
Can I just highlight an irony in the thing that...
Yeah.
So you were studying Martin Luther King and you were talking about the civil rights thing.
Yeah.
And your teacher got all disappointed. I imagine that she's like Democrat or leans left. And, you know, the big irony of people who like are on the left and champion Martin Luther King is that a lot of them, if they know this, they'll be very upset. Martin Luther King was Republican. He was a Republican.
I actually didn't know that.
He was a Republican. A lot of people, it's funny when you mention that to a Democrat or somebody on the left, they'll rewrite it. Oh, well, back then it was different. They always, their talking point is always like, oh, well, the party switched. At what point? At what point? Explain it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the Civil War, you know, Republicans were, the party was specifically created to fight against the Democrats who wanted to expand slavery. The Democrats founded the KKK, right? They worked against the Civil Rights Act. The Republicans worked for it. And the last living member of the KKK who was in Congress, what party was he with?
The Democrat.
Yeah, it was a Democrat, Robert Byrd. And who gave the eulogy at his funeral?
I don't know.
Hillary Clinton.
Oh my God.
So
I didn't know that.
And this was like just a couple of years before she ran for president.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah. They'll be like, oh, well, the Dixiecrats went with the Republicans. No, they were clearly still in the Democrats. They just, you know, the Democrats have always been like very good at propaganda. And that's what I feel like happened to you. You at the young age in elementary school, you were hit with a teacher who was unknowingly or knowingly influencing your perspective of the world, because you had a very positive, you're like, oh my God, we've overcome all of this. And she just threw something that you weren't ready to like comprehend contextually and historically, because you're just like so young and you're so impressionable. And she dimmed your worldview. Like, I think that that's like a great disservice for a teacher to do to a child.
I know.
To a child, like you know, you're set. I mean, you're a very smart person, and you've come to a better understanding of it. But you know, the fact that you remember that moment so strongly really speaks to that teacher's impact that they had. They set you on a route for like years. And I experienced something similar in a different degree when I was growing up too, which, I was also at one point, on a more like left side of the thing. Right. And I've had moments where I move more moderate and then I feel more there, but it just got to a point where it's like either I assume that these are my values, that I stand for this and I don't care what people think about it. Or like I just go with the flow and I'm just the person who is essentially living my life by the opinions of others, right? And that's
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't actually hold their own opinions. I actually respect, even if you're more progressive, but if I can have a conversation with you and understand why you got to that conclusion, I mean, I respect it. I don't agree with you, but at least I know, I'm like, okay, I understand what they're trying to say or their worldview. They actually put some time into this belief or opinion versus the person who just hears it from their favorite celebrity or their teacher, and that's how they base off their opinion.
So middle school.
Yes, so middle school. I went to Walter Reed Middle School, which is a lot of celebrities' children go here, and it was predominantly white. There was a shift demographically because at my elementary school, a huge percentage was Latinos. But when I came to my middle school, it was a significantly less percentage, maybe like 15%. And so to me, it was a little bit of a culture shock, especially because my parents are both immigrants.
Where are they from?
El Salvador, my mother, and then Mexico, my father.
Interesting. How long were they here before you were born? Sorry to derail this.
No, you're good. It was... they both came in 92, I believe. So not too long. They still didn't fully grasp what this society was compared to their home, right? Very different like culture, and even the political system is different. So I really feel for first generations, it's not an easy thing. Yeah. Because we really are, especially if you're the oldest of a family, it really is on you to do the work, to do the failures and study, because your parents don't know. And it's not their fault. They did the best that they could. They did what they thought was right. Maybe it wasn't, but it does fall on the first generation student. Whereas like the second generation, third generation, or if you're like full on, your bloodline is since the beginning of this nation, right? Yeah. I mean, you really understand what the American dream is, what it stands for. But when you're an immigrant, it's not the same thing, Yeah,
you don't have anybody to show you the ropes. And America, we were even talking about this before we got started. America is kind of framed in the opposite of what most nations are. Just from its inception, most nations assume that your rights are granted by the government. America assumes that your rights are granted by God. Thus, the Constitution exists to protect you from government interference on the rights given to you by God. So I think that a lot of, even if you come from like a Christian country, like Brazil or El Salvador, it's still a relatively foreign concept. Like in Brazil right now, people are going to prison for what they say, right? They're having their social media accounts deleted because their political speech is was seen as offensive. Or there's one Brazilian comedian who actually moved to America. I think he's living in New York. I'm not sure. But he got sued for like millions of dollars, and he lost the lawsuit. He made a pretty gross joke. And I'm not going to repeat the joke because it's very gross.
It's very vulgar.
Well, I mean, it's so nasty.
Okay.
I can tell you afterwards. But it's such a nasty joke. But he got sued. The joke was about a celebrity. He got sued. He lost, and he got deplatformed to like an extent that's even by the standards that the left has created here for cancel culture. It's like unimaginable, and it was over a joke. It wasn't like he was a rapist. It was like he lost his TV show. Got completely deplatformed on every social media, debanked. He was like getting evicted. He couldn't. He would go places and people, would like harass him. So, there's no place like America, right? And I think that if you're moving here as an immigrant, you kind of have to deprogram yourself from the culture that you came from, especially politically and governmentally. So that you can be used, so you can adapt here,
Yeah, and I think a lot of first generation, it's not even just first generation. I think it really is just Gen Z, honestly. We don't realize how spoiled we are, or things we should be grateful for. Okay, so quick story. This last year and the year before, I went to El Salvador with my mom and my little sister. And both me and my little sister had immense culture shock. It was just a completely different world. We've never seen poverty to that extent. I'm talking about dogs where you can see their rib cages, people desperate to sell. Like, these are people on the street who have fruit. And they really are just trying. They're like, come on, like I can give you this mango, or I could give you a discount. Like, you can just tell they're desperate to have money for their family. And on top of that, another one, it was that I've never seen so many Salvadorians in my life. It was just it was just everywhere I saw, I was like, there's no Asian people here, Armenians. It was white people, nobody.
Yeah.
And even that, I was, when we came back, me and my little sister, we realized how grateful we should be. I mean, just the different cuisines we have here, right? The different backgrounds, the bathroom over there in my aunt's house. She lives in this, village kind of area. So to flush, you have to use a bucket of water and
you just
put
fill
it
up.
Yeah. And even that, I'm like, we are so spoiled. Like, we could just use the little
button,
the little button, and then it flushes. So even our plumbing system is more advanced here. And ever since that trip, it really did change my worldview, my life, and made me realize, wow, this is a great nation that we are in. Sure, it has its dark history, maybe, but then again, every country does. It's just doesn't make sense to make America like the most evil country, the most racist country ever, when that's far from the truth. Especially right now, I would say that it's probably one of the least racist countries. And I think, I mean, even I was talking to my friend who's a historian. He, in his opinion, he thinks that Mexico is a more racist country.
Interesting, yeah.
The culture is a little more, there's a little more racism there than here in LA. And I do think that people just have to go outside of America. I'm not talking about going to, London or
go to places that aren't Western Europe.
Yeah, go to El Salvador, go to I don't know, Brazil, maybe?
Southeast Asia too.
Yeah, just any place that is not, I guess, as developed.
Not the Western world, basically, which is usually considered Western Europe. the United States and Canada, and then depending on who you're talking to, Australia as well. But because it's highly urbanized, very developed, you have every basic necessity, every basic service that the government should provide you is there, well funded and well executed. Obviously, the left is trying to tear that down in America, so it doesn't work. You know? But it's it's interesting you say all of that, because I think traveling abroad is really what ends up helping people understand how good we have it in this country.
Absolutely.
And some of the things you described are like the racism that you mentioned about Mexico. Now I can't speak to that because I've only been to Mexico like once, and I went to Tijuana for like 3 days, right? But it makes sense to an extent that countries that are more homogenous and don't have the level of diversity that we have, they don't have to think outside of their national identity.
That's true.
Right? They don't, in America, we're constantly having dialogue about who's who, why they're like that, what's their place in society, how can we improve it? And it speaks to just the American spirit. And a lot of these values have been subverted by the left, which takes a lot of the foundational values of this country and subverts it so that they can expand government power beyond what is a necessity, right? Beyond the services of like plumbing, electricity, making sure everybody has access to, their communities being safe.
I like the point you make, because I don't think a lot of Democrats are necessarily evil. I do think the leaders are probably evil, but I'm talking about the voters themselves. Yeah. I think they do have good intentions, and that's why it attracts them, this idea of universal health care, because it just sounds good, right? The intention behind it sounds very virtuous, but the problem is that when it comes to
in practice,
it's not that, and that's the main issue I have with the left. A lot of their like claims in practice don't work.
They don't, and I think the good thing that Republicans do is they balance that out, right? Because Republicans have the realistic, practical, pragmatic view of things of like, oh yeah, you want the government to run this? Go look at the post office. That's how it's gonna look. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's like
it's always, when you point to a practical example, you're like, oh, okay, I don't want my hospital to look like the post office, and it is. I mean, Obamacare, when they first implemented it, the website didn't work for weeks, and it was a joke, became a joke.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's on the surface, it's well intentioned. The leaders are absolutely evil. I don't see a single Democrat leader as like a person of good reputation who is well intentioned and isn't like a career politician who's looking to get ahead, right? But the voters, unfortunately, I think a lot of them, their heart is in the right place. They're just misguided,
Yeah.
Which is where people like yourself, like you, come in, and I want to bring it back to the middle school thing, because that's why I think your story is like important, because there are a lot of young people who find themselves at the crossroads of hearing all this propaganda from their teachers and popular culture, and then in college you get there, your professors are saying the same thing, and sometimes your parents are parroting it at home as well. If it's what their beliefs are, and you get it on television, and I think it's like a cycle, right? And it starts in school, it's reinforced by pop culture, and by the time you get to college, you're basically incapable of having free thought, because you're so indoctrinated that you believe if it's been successful. If the Democrat playbook has been successful, you believe that you have to vote Democrat because it's existential to the maintenance of your lifestyle, right? And you take abortion as an issue. That's why so many, young women or white young women, college age, vote Democrat, because they believe if I don't vote for them, I'm going to lose my rights.
Yeah. So
back to the middle school.
I'll sum up the middle school and high school experience. So in middle school, I felt isolated because I was Hispanic, and I felt that simply because of my race, I just couldn't really relate. Maybe there was some truth to that. I just couldn't relate to my classmates. But the problem was that I believed that because they were white or they were rich, right? Their parents were probably Republicans. I was like, these are racist kids. Like that's what I feel like that's what I subconsciously thought. Not that I thought all white people were like racist, but I think there was this underlying prejudice of judging simply because of white. And I think that's my biggest problem with the leftists. Slowly, it starts to make your worldview super like hyper fixated on race.
Yeah.
And you just start making these assumptions just based off like your first impression of meeting someone.
Yeah.
Right? Versus having a conversation with people and then starting to know this person, where they're coming, and you'll see that you actually have more in common with this person than you may think. So yeah, in middle school, that was kind of my experience. I was more of a loner, right? I didn't have a lot of I didn't make a lot of friends in middle school, and that actually got me into like well, am I gonna expose myself here? Maybe. In 8th grade, that's where I started to experiment with like weed and stuff.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of what it was. Just it started derailing me, right? But in middle school, I would say that there was this racial kind of narrative starting to be pushed on
in middle school.
On minorities, kind of.
How is that narrative? How did you hear? Like, what was being told to you?
I think it did come from certain teachers, like history teachers, for example.
Yeah.
But it started to affect even the white kids because
really,
because whenever, let's say, a white kid had conservative parents, so of course at home they were
like
hearing
they had to overcompensate.
Well, they were. I think they would openly say like a more conservative point of view, and there was kind of like backlash on that, right?
Really?
Yeah. And
was it from the teacher or the other students?
I would say it was more from the students. I can't really recall any teachers being extremely leftist in middle school. I think maybe they were, but it wasn't anything crazy. But it just started to feel, I'm sure these kids thought like it was taboo to have a more conservative stance.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my middle school experience. I just felt like that started creeping in.
And it was primarily in the history class, or did you feel it in any other classes like English, math, or?
No. I think it was mainly like English history. Although I did have a good history teacher. I don't know where she lands on the political spectrum, but excuse me, when she taught history, she was very pro-America. She loved the founding fathers, and she did teach history in a pretty neutral point of view.
She's 100% a Republican.
It was neutral. It didn't seem like she had an agenda to push. It was more of like, here are the facts. You guys come to your own conclusion.
That's a Republican value.
Yeah. She probably was.
Yeah, that's 100%.
So, okay, so then I'll fast forward to high school. I think this is where the racial tension started to increase more. This is where this idea of me being a minority really started to affect my worldview. And towards like junior year, high school years, when the LGBT stuff started being pushed. Maybe not the trans stuff.
How was that pushed?
It was just pop culture. Kids started seeing it on like social media and stuff. So I was in theater, right? There's kind of like both theater and volleyball have a lot of LGBT community.
Oh yeah, I don't know about volleyball, but theater, it's like all gay.
Yeah, for sure.
Gay,
Theater
lesbian,
for
yeah.
sure. Volleyball does too, though. When I would go to the open gyms here, there is a big community of the LGBT. So it's just happened to be that those were the two activities I was into. I'm not I'm not part of the LGBT, but I liked playing volleyball and I liked acting, right? And so theater was the vessel in which I can act, right? So I was in theater and stuff, and through my my friends, they were starting to talk about the LGBT stuff, and so that's where I first got introduced to. Started hearing it, yeah.
Were they gay as well, or were they just like?
They were all over the place. Okay. I mean, pansexual, bisexual, all these different.
How old were they?
I mean, they were like sophomores, juniors.
So they were like 15.
Yeah, around that age, 15 to 17.
So young to be talking about that kind of stuff. It's like,
it's insane. But the theater teacher had a pride flag, and she was LGBT as well. So
did she ever talk about it in class, or it was just the presence of that?
She did talk about it, but she didn't push it on us in the class. But during she had the LGBT club, I think, and during lunch. If you went to her classroom, that was usually the topic. So
interesting. What kinds did you ever go?
Maybe once.
What do they talk about?
It was mainly, I guess, about it's similar to the minority kind of conversation where
so it's you're oppressed.
Yeah, that kind of narrative.
Yeah.
But my other theater teacher, because it was two theater teachers, my other theater teacher was an English teacher, and she's super big William Shakespeare fan, right?
Yeah, basic English.
Yeah, for real. But the kids didn't like her, right? Yeah. I liked her; she was cool, but there was constant conflict behind the scenes between that teacher and the LGBT teacher.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. This is me speculating, but maybe it was that could have been maybe some tension that was happening, right?
Gotcha. So maybe was the other English teacher, the Shakespeare teacher, was she a part of the LGBT community as well?
No, she wasn't. No, she wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you able to grasp what her values were, kind of, or no?
I don't necessarily think she's Republican. She's probably more just center moderate. Yeah.
I don't see how you could be an English teacher and be a Republican. I mean, I think most Republicans, if they're teachers in school, they're teaching woodworking, if they still teach that. They're teaching practical skills you can use to make money. You know what I mean?
True.
Or they're in more leadership roles, the superintendent or something. Not every single one, because there's some super woke superintendents out there. But that's how it was in my school, at least. It was the teachers, the social studies teacher was super, the equivalent of woke. Right? Because back then woke wasn't a thing. You didn't even know what it was. But thinking back on it, she was insanely woke.
Yeah.
My English teacher was very woke. History teacher, very woke, with the exception of my 10th grade history teacher. He was like a dude from New York, very, very grounded, working class,
nice.
Acted very much like. It was the first day of class, he scared the shit out of us. It was but yeah, it's interesting when you look back and you start thinking of the influence these teachers have in your life, and even something as innocuous as let's all meet together at lunch for the LGBT club, and you can come. If you're straight, you're an ally. You can come and hear us,
right.
and that's how it seeps in. It's just a little bit of, this word has kind of been bastardized a little bit, but there's an aspect of grooming in there where you're talking to a 15-year-old about not something look, what are you going to have for lunch, or what are your preferences as far as what car you want to get. You're talking about it's sexual acts.
Yeah, it's
basically
very weird.
And it's fine that it's part of people's identity, but I think when you're dealing with minors like that, if you're having these kinds of discussions, especially if a parent isn't involved, and during lunch where it's unsupervised, it's not part of the curriculum, it's something that you could end up talking about anything. You went to one meeting, it could be, they could have talked about that during that one meeting, whatever it was. you know, about discovering yourself or, you know, but all of a sudden, you know, you could come to another meeting and you're talking about something that, you know, kind of shouldn't be discussed between an adult. Like I wouldn't want, you know, my child to discuss
I
with.
know, talk about those things yet.
Exactly. So
it doesn't seem appropriate.
It's something that I think, look, the conversation with religion and school, being in school and being, you know, people being connected to their faith as politicians, it always goes back to the separation of church and state, right? Yeah. Oh, the separation of church and state. You got to separate the church and state. Fine. I think most Christians are fine with that idea because it's a biblical idea. Even Jesus talked about it, right? Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God. It's, you know, basic concept of, you know, the kingdom of God isn't worldly. Like we're not going to mix those two, right? I think the same thing should be applied to LGBT ideologies. Like, you know, the gay agenda, whatever you want to call it, like race theory, political ideology, you separate it from the school. You know, if you want to go and learn about the social sciences, sure, you can take it as an elective, right? You go learn political science, you join an after school club. Your parents are aware of who's teaching it, what their political leanings are, so that, you know, you don't come back. Like you mentioned, a lot of the kids in one of your classes were conservative or grew up in conservative households. All of a sudden now they're introducing this problem. You know, the teacher's introducing this problem because they're essentially creating an environment where they're teaching from a certain perspective, and then they're having social bias within the classroom influence these kids to go against their own values of their own household, right? And you know, it's a very toxic environment if you grow up with different values, you know, because then now you're growing up and you're inciting rebellion at home, right? And look, there's a larger conversation to be had about this. It goes down to cultural Marxism, right?
Yeah, it does.
And it goes down to it's a very sneaky way of dissolving the family unit, right? And it's not 100% effective all the time, but I would say like that it creates unnecessary conflict at home because you have a child who isn't fully formed or doesn't have a full understanding of context or the political context of what's happening out, you know. And they're getting home and they're essentially being pit against their parents with these very complex conversations, right? To this day, like it's hard to have a political conversation because so much of it changes. There's so much context. You have to know so much. You have to be studying so much, reading so much, knowing, you know, and people will lie to you. Politicians will lie to your face about things. Like Democrats just spent the last 2-3 weeks lying about Kelmar Abrego Garcia, you know, and then all of a sudden 3 weeks later, you see the body cam tape where he was a human trafficker, right? You see everything get confirmed. So it's I think it's an unfair burden to be putting on children, you know, to basically dump all this stuff on them from this one-sided perspective because it never goes the other way. It's very rarely that you see a conservative teacher, and when they are in school, they do exactly what you said. They teach both sides in an unbiased way, and you're like, make up your own mind, right? But if it's a leftist teacher, it's like they are there to fulfill the agenda that serves their ideology. Right? It's very rarely. That's why you see them, like you mentioned, they had the pride flag in class. That's a political statement. That shouldn't be allowed in class.
And I don't understand why we're dragging the children into this stuff. I think schools just need to get back to what they were intended for, to educate and present the information as neutral as possible. Let parents take care of when they're going to have the more difficult conversations. That's not what's happening. And it really does bother me that it's just, I see that a lot of schools have become politically motivated.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I'll go into the college now, right? So like I mentioned, in high school or senior year is where the LGBT stuff started coming in. So this was the first time this narrative started pushing in. But keep in mind, at this point, I did start to have this worldview of oppression, right? Even though maybe I didn't fully understand, my worldview was that white people are inherently racist unless they feel guilty about what their ancestors do and stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's a good one. That's what I used to believe.
Did you ever feel like, because you mentioned that some of it carried in school, did you ever feel like it carried outside of school? Like
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's because once you build a worldview, it's like a lens you're carrying 24/7.
Yeah.
Even if you're out of school, you still think that way outside of school. On top of that, pop culture doesn't help either. Pop culture is what strayed me away from God.
Yeah.
Because it's uncool to believe in God or be Christian. You get seen as like, I don't know, lame or weird.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that it's coming back though. We see these influencers who are proud of Jesus, they're proud of God, and they own it, which I think that's really good for our culture.
Yeah.
But so at this point in high school, I kind of already had that layer of my worldview that I was at a huge disadvantage because of my background. So then once I go into college, I'm a freshman. There's orientation, right? For the freshmen, I remember we go to the CSUN auditorium and they give us like a welcome presentation. We got some speakers. And then after that, the tour guide makes us go in a circle and we all have to introduce ourselves. She tells us that we have to give our name, our major, and our pronouns.
Yeah.
So this was the first time I had to hear pronouns since the last time in elementary school, right?
Yeah.
I remember learning about pronouns, but why did I have to give this, I thought, very obvious information? So I asked the person to my left, I'm like, what's pronouns? Like, what do they mean by this?
Yeah.
And she, the guy was just like, oh, like your pronouns, if you don't know about this, you're probably a he, him, his, or whatever.
If you don't know
right?
about this, it's probably common sense. Like, shouldn't be asking you this.
So we all, give, our name, our major, and then our pronouns. Literally no person said they, them, or the opposite pronoun.
Opposite.
Yeah. We all, so
you didn't get a Z's here?
No,
it wasn't a neo pronoun? Not even a neo pronoun in there?
I'm sure it's a different case now. I'm sure there are, but at that time it was still like new. It was barely being pushed.
Yeah.
So it was just a useless piece of information. I mean, guys were he, him, his, girls were she, her, hers. I mean, I was confused, but I didn't question the narrative. And throughout college, I didn't even realize at what point. So I went to college for 3 years. I didn't graduate. But throughout that time, I didn't even realize at what point I accepted the gender ideology.
It just happened.
It just happened because in volleyball there was a trans friend that I had. We played volleyball, and everyone knew, like, we were confused, right? We never said it straight up to his face, but behind the scenes, we were always like, is it a guy or a girl? Like we were.
Wait, were they
confused.
male to female or female to male?
Male to female.
Uh-huh.
Right. But we always kind of asked that, but we knew that it would be offensive if we directly asked.
And he played with you guys, or he played with the ladies? Didn't play with the ladies.
No, tried out for the guys' volleyball team. So that confirmed to me. Could you believe, like, that's how,
well, respect
that's
for
how
that.
confused I was.
I respect that, because a lot of people do the opposite. They go male to female so they can play with the women and just destroy them.
Right.
And in fact, there was a case at a university that this male to female player ended up, like, this chick broke her nose or something, injured I think 2 different girls. It's crazy.
It's insane.
Anyway, keep going.
So that's what at that point, that's when I realized that I was infected by the gender ideology, right? I was like, oh well, I do remember that in third grade biology, we learned that there's male, female. But I guess, science says that, you could be a female if you feel like one. So I just accepted this idea, but I realized later, right? Once I reflected, I never really bought into it. I think what really was going on, that I was afraid of the reaction I would get from others.
Yeah.
If I did say like, well, I don't believe that. I think there's just a guy and a girl, and I mean, it's as simple as that.
And it ties back to the history class of like the social aspect of it is the reinforcement of the introduction of the ideology, right? You introduce it in an innocuous way, and then all of a sudden you have the social aspect of it, which is what reinforces and prevents you from accepting your common sense. With the conservative students in your history class, and now you in volleyball experiencing a different kind of conundrum, right? And this the word you've been using is a good word to describe this, the confusion, especially the confusion with the pronoun question and the confusion with in how to treat the situation in your volleyball environment, right? Because that's ultimately that's a Marxist tool, right?
Yeah, it is.
That's how you undo the fabric of society, is by creating confusion around the smallest things, and all of a sudden there isn't assurance, there isn't trust, right? Good societies are built on trust, mutual trust with everything. Even the stock market is built on trust. Trust falls, stock market dips, right? If you don't trust that there's going to be money in that specific company tomorrow, you're going to take your money out. Exactly. So it's how you slowly, like a disease, right? You end up, subverting and eating away at every single one of these institutions. That's why, Michael Knowles put this really well. I saw him in the debate that he did, the Jubilee debate. He was one of the first times I ever heard somebody describe it like this, but he described transgenderism as a social contagion, right? The ideology of transgenderism is a social contagion, right? The idea that it's like a mind virus, which is what a lot of these ideologies are. And that's why you're like trapped. You're like, your mind is like, your common sense can't come through. You got the flu for your head, right? So
you really learn to ignore your instinct, your common sense. Like you said, it's like these common sense things, but because there's just this environment of confusion, you don't even trust your own gut of like, wait, this doesn't logically make sense. But I mean, I guess it is what it is. I mean, the authorities say it's true, so it must be true.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you said it like that. The authority said it's true, because it goes back to the trust thing, right? We all want to be able to trust that our government is making the most sound, rational decisions that are going to improve our lives, because we're paying into this government, right? We're all taxpayers. We're all paying into it. We're paying for these services. And, there's that trust. We want to trust these institutions, but at the end of the day, a lot of them don't have our best interest.
Yep.
They want to serve their own interests, right? And I even think with the gender ideology stuff, I don't think most Democrats even believe in that stuff. Of course, there's some degenerates that do, right? And this is like a topic for another conversation. The mayor of Burbank, I was even hearing this yesterday about some of the stuff that he's involved in, and the 44th Assemblyman, Nick Schultz as well. Like a lot of these guys are involved with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of Democrats are just happy to take the money from the LGBT lobby, from GLAAD, and from all these institutions that are are just drowning in money, and they're using this money to curate influence and to get specific policies and politicians in place to stand for them. And that's why my theory on how we got here was, we had it. Obergefell happened. Right, Obergefell was the Supreme Court decision that legalized gay marriage.
Oh, okay.
Right, and once it happened, I remember I was in New York and I was walking around. I was in the Village, which, for anybody who may not know out there, the Village is like, it's one of the gayest places in New York. It's where the Stonewall riots happened, right? But you're walking in New York, like all of a sudden you're in the Village, all of a sudden you're in Soho. You're just walking around. and it, I just happened to be passing there, and there was like this rally right in front of Stonewall. And I was like, oh, wow, that's right. They just, approved gay marriage today. Let's see some of what they're saying. I hope they're happy, right? Because isn't this what they're working for? They can rest now, right? It's over. No, it was like I listened to two speakers and people on megaphones, and they were all like, they were all talking about how the trans thing was next. And I was like, what? Why? Why does it? But now it makes sense to me, thinking of it from the money side, right? You have these huge PACs, you have these huge lobby groups, they're all drowning in money. And if they don't spend that money just goes away. The money behind the cause goes away. Same reason why feminism has continued to evolve. We're on the fifth wave or however, whichever wave.
It's not about equality anymore.
It's not. It's about maintaining everybody's pockets full. And that's why it became, as soon as that issue was over, it became the next issue. Because
it continuously gets more radicalized each generation, though.
Exactly.
Compare first wave feminism to today's wave, completely different.
And it becomes more of a parody of itself, because first wave feminism was about voting rights, right? And things that everybody would agree with. Yes, women should be able to vote and should be able to make decisions on if they want to, whatever, but you get to fifth wave feminism, and those decisions are like, all right, I want to kill my baby with zero consequences.
I really think it'd be a really interesting podcast if we had a first wave feminist and radical feminist.
Yeah.
I really believe that the first wave feminist would be shocked that the today's feminists believe that a woman can be a man.
Well, that discussion is actually happening, and it's happening on like a really high level. You see what J.K. Rowling is going through. Yeah. She's called a TERF, right? A trans-exclusionary radical feminist, right? Which is a totally made-up term. It's weird. Like, the reality is, like, men can't be women. I'm sorry, dude. Like, I'll respect you, but like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're not gonna be the same woman that J.K. Rowling can be, and I'll respect your right to represent yourself however you want. I'll even play along and call you whatever pronoun you want to be called to your face. Like, but I don't care. Like, I'm not going to pretend you're something you're not. It's just denying reality doesn't make things better for anybody, right? But yeah, and it's interesting because J.K. Rowling isn't even that far out. Like, she's, I think, if you put her on the map of feminists, she's like third wave or fourth wave. She's like. And it's interesting how it was like in a span of 10 years, it went whoosh.
I know.
To this like insane aspect of like, pretty soon they're going to be saying dogs are women. You know what I mean? Like, it's.
I'm glad you brought the feminist topic, because that's actually the third layer to my conversion to being a conservative, right? So I mentioned the oppression aspect of it, right? So this narrative of I'm oppressed. The second wave was the LGBT stuff being pushed, right? And the gender ideology. So the final layer was this anti-men narrative. I didn't mention it in my story of middle school, high school, and even college. But throughout that time of my life, I hated being a guy, right? Yeah. There was this, it's almost like what white people feel just for being white, this guilt. Guys feel it too. You feel guilty because you're a guy. You're like, oh, like I'm just made as an oppressor. I'm part of the patriarchy. I'm inherently evil because I'm a guy. And women are superior. They're more intellectual. They're smarter. We should pedestalize them. And it really is a very toxic narrative to men. I think that's why men are becoming conservative. The pendulum swinging back, because the Democrat Party has really just made you feel like shit for being a guy. Yeah. And in order to be accepted as a guy, you have to be part of LGBT, right? Yeah. Or you have to be a feminist yourself, right? Yeah. You just have to use your male privilege to bash on other men because they're men, right? And I think that the same is happening with women too, or not white people in general. They're only the good guys if they feel guilt, right? And they use their privilege to fight against the conservative white people.
It's self-effacing. It's like you constantly have to be self-effacing, or like going against your own interests for the sake of these interests that the party or the Democrat Party has told you are greater than your own interests. And it's honestly, it's destructive to your confidence as a man. It's destructive to society in general, because there's a reason why we have that saying: weak men make hard times, right? Yep. We're training an entire generation of men to basically not stand up when they see something bad happen, right? We have examples like Daniel Penny out in New York, who got dragged through the justice system. Daniel Penny, the case was there was a homeless guy in a subway, and he was threatening to kill people. And he put him on a chokehold. He's like, stop the guy. He's a Marine. He put him on a chokehold, stop the guy. The guy ended up dying afterwards, right? And it's unfortunate that he died, right? But in that situation, like, somebody has to stand up, right? And you constantly see posts on social media of women saying, well, I feel unsafe. Where are the men? There's so-and-so, a dude was harassing me on the subway. No man did anything. Well, why? Because there's that threat, not just from the state, but from women themselves, that you're going to be villainized for doing something like that. So that's it. It's like a 5-prong attack that the left has created. It's like they're attacking every side of the culture, and ultimately, by dividing us in the way they have, that's how they can like take down these groups and essentially inoculate them, so they can centralize the power around a specific group of people, right? And the thing that you felt, it's this constant like push to just like, shut up. You shouldn't have a voice. You're a man. Wait to speak. Wait to like. And who says that your perspective is as valid as anybody? You walk out there, the same rules of the world apply to everybody. Yeah. Right? They apply to you as it does to the black woman across the street, as it does to the Asian dude across the street, as it does to the white guy who's driving his car by. Like, the rules of the world apply to everybody equally. So why do you value less all of a sudden? Right?
Exactly, man. And those are the 3 layers that were very destructive to my confidence, like you said, and my worldview. It was a very toxic environment that made me very miserable. And I'm not unique to this. I think a lot of people feel this, and they might not be fully aware that the school environment is feeding into this. TikTok, right? Your social media is another layer to it. And then also your friends or friend group who's also, because of the environmental factors,
they're conversation.
Yep, they're reinforcing it within themselves in their conversations, and you used the word earlier, but this is cultural Marxism, and that's what wokeism is. It stems from Marxism, and I only knew what that was until once I dropped out. And I started exploring.
And why did you drop out again? Because you have a very specific reason why.
Yeah, so I was 3rd year of college, and I felt like I was doing the right things. I listened to what my mentor told me, right? Do these internships, get good grades, make connections, which I did that, right? I was a personal trainer for a volleyball team at a high school. I was doing a strength and conditioning internship for the CSUN athletes. I was part of a volunteer fitness program, and then school, right? Those were the 4 things that were taking up my time. And it was so hard to manage. I remember this was the most depressed I've felt in my life. Every morning, I had to get to CSUN at 5 in the morning, and I'd come back home like at 11 p.m., right? And it was just this cycle. And at some point, I was doing what they call sleep revenge, which is when you don't give yourself any leisure time throughout your day. So you try to get leisure time at night. You eat up into your sleep. So I was up maybe like all the way up to like 2 a.m, right? I would get faded and I would watch YouTube videos up to that time. That's what I thought was...
You were trying to numb the pain.
Exactly. That's what it was. And then I would wake up every morning feeling like crap. And I would... Every time when I was driving to CSUN, I would just be like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. Like, it was just kind of that mentality. For the first time, I started having, I wouldn't say dark thoughts. I wasn't like trying to like kill myself, but it was a little frightening to start to have darker thoughts of like,
creep in.
Like, yeah, what if it is easier just to like, like end it here. And it sounds a little extreme, right? But I think that's probably how it starts for people that do become suicidal. I don't think it's like from one day to the other, they've just reached that point. It's just life becomes so miserable that over time, it just starts to lead towards
takes you in that direction.
In that direction, yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that you went through all that. But that cycle is very familiar to a lot of people. And it's a cycle that, I mean, once you put together all the elements, it's the ideological cycle plus the pressures of the state, because you're told you have to go to college, you have to go to this specific four-year college, get in debt, do all this, so then you can pay the debt, and you have to study this and this and that. And it's a very specific structure that ultimately leads to the outcome that you just described, right? When, I mean, in other conversations, you mentioned other pathways, which are things that people don't take into consideration or look down on, but are lives that will ultimately set you up to not only be more free, but to go through less stress, less debt, and have, basically become a business owner almost off the bat, like you mentioned.
Or even trade schools, like electricians,
trade
plumbers.
schools.
Why do we look down upon those people? Those people are essential to a society. Yeah. Without them, we wouldn't.
This wouldn't be here. None of this would be here.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, it's a very straightforward path. I'm talking 6 months to a year of training. Boom, get right into the workforce, and you start earning more money than if you went through the 4-year process of college. And now you're struggling to find a job. So in the meantime, you're working at McDonald's. Yeah, it's just, and then what you mentioned, you're in debt. So there's that stress in the back of your mind, like, oh, I have to pay this off. Yeah. Whereas, I mean, I think trade schools are underrated. And then you can even start looking towards building up wealth through real estate or business.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that that's the narrative that's been cultivated. I think a lot of people are just robbing themselves of a lot of freedom.
Yep.
From
my friend's an electrician, and he makes pretty good money.
Oh, they make hand over fist.
And he's a jazz drummer, so he gets to do that on the side as well. Like, to me, that's what freedom is. Like, you're contributing to society, and you have time to spend with your family, friends, and your hobbies.
Yeah, but I want to take it back to you were talking about your awakening.
Yeah.
In the middle of all this is happening. You got all this turmoil in your life, which, in my opinion, I haven't mentioned this yet, but I'm thinking about this. Like, it's just demonic. All of it is like demonic influence. Yeah. From the ideological side to the financial pressure and the structuring of the schedule that you had, and the fact that it led you to these things where you felt like you had to numb yourself and you're like not sleeping, and then all these thoughts start creeping in. That's a very meticulous schedule that you were put on by the enemy so that you could essentially self-destruct, right?
Yep. So I'll finish off why I dropped out.
Yeah.
So, because it did play a big role on my conversion. I felt like I was doing all the right things. And I remember being in the car. It was towards the end of the semester, finals week, very stressful. And I was just kind of having like an existential crisis in my car and realizing, is this it? Is this what life is about? I chose a major that I thought I liked. The reason I was majoring in kinesiology, study of the human body, was because I thought I wanted to work with athletes, to be some sort of like personal trainer for them. And I was doing it. That's what I had a job, right, at the volleyball high school and the internship.
Yeah.
And I hated it.
Yeah.
So it really made me face this reality of I've spent 3 years in college studying this and I don't even like it. Like,
Yeah.
what am I doing here? And I realized that I never gave myself time to explore other fields. I just kind of chose kinesiology because I was a volleyball player and I loved volleyball at that time. That was my passion.
Yeah.
But even in college, I dropped volleyball because I was so stressed out about other things. I was like, yeah, volleyball is not going to pay the bills. Like it's not important in my life. Where that was the main reason why I was even in kinesiology. So I was just having these deep thoughts, and I led to the conclusion that I need to take a gap year. I actually, deep down, I knew I was going to drop out. But I think psychologically, I was too scared to commit to just immediately drop out. I felt like a more comfortable way of framing it was, let me take a gap year so I can rationally think about this and decide if I'm going to finish college or if I'm actually going to commit and drop out.
Yeah.
So this is where the exploratory phase happened. I took a gap year. I got a good job because of kinesiology. I was working at some like osteoporosis clinic, like a healthy alternative of that, not pharma. I don't like big pharma. Yeah. So that I just felt like the chains were released. Like when I took the gap year and I started working at this place, my bosses were super cool. They were like, think of like small business owners versus like, working at a big corporate. It was more, it was more fulfilling to work there. And I just felt like I had freedom. Like I was like, oh my God, I don't have to go to class right now. Like I could go in the middle of the day, go get a Starbucks, get on my laptop and start studying some history or something. Like I had the freedom to do that, or I could go practice my piano. Like it was just this weight released off my shoulder. And then I started exploring, right? And this phase was the most important. Dropping out was actually the most important decision I've made in my life. The most courageous step I've done in my life, because shout out to my parents. They've always been supportive of my decision. They didn't fully like it, especially my dad did not like that I dropped out, because he's like, dude, you have 1 year left, right?
Yeah.
But I came to the conclusion that my time was more valuable. I don't know. I think God knows, right? God's plan. He knows why it happened the way it happened. And it's just the most important year of my life, because that's where I started exploring like financial stuff. I got into the life insurance business. To come to find out, it was kind of like scammy, and I was like, I don't know about this, right? Then I started looking into kind of like the economics perspective of what is economics. Then that kind of led me into politics and looking into conservative points of views, which that's where it really started to shatter the woke narratives I had in my brain. I was like, oh yeah, masculinity isn't inherently bad, and it's okay that I feel these things, that I can have confidence in my opinions, that there are certain social expectations of men, like you mentioned earlier. If there's some danger, it's on the guys to protect, right?
Yeah.
I started looking into Marxism, and that's what just completely shattered the woke programming, because it just made it completely cleared it up for me that this is where this ideology was stemming from. It's like the roots of it, right? And the strategies and even the way they use language, right?
Yeah.
Language is a weapon to them.
100%.
Because think about it. Just because you have a different opinion, right? Let's say you have more of a traditional view on men, immediately you're called a sexist or a misogynist, right?
Yeah.
Or if you bring up race, right? People get a little iffy on it, right? Or if you defend white people, let's say, right? That you say that you can be racist to white people. Oh, you're all of a sudden a white supremacist, a fascist, a Nazi.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean, that Marxists use language as a weapon because they have no meaning. That's not what a fascist is.
Yeah.
That's being a traditional man doesn't automatically make you a misogynist. A misogynist has a very specific definition. It means this hatred for women. It's more synonymous to an incel. So it's just language has no meaning. That's why they make this argument of a woman can be whatever you want it to mean. It's like, no, a woman has a definition. It's something.
It's a biological definition. They have the XX chromosome. Yeah.
So my point with this is that Marxism just completely shattered the programming. Hearing conservative points of view shattered it as well. And I won't lie, there was a time where I did become a little too far on the right because I was not used to me researching and coming to my own opinion. And you're just so used to believing the authority and taking it as fact. So when I was on the conservative side, I was just whatever Charlie Kirk was saying, I was like, oh yeah, that's true. That's true. Or whatever Andrew Tate was saying, I was like, yep, that's true. That's true. But I think now I'm more concerned on actually researching and really finding what is my opinion, kind of seeing all perspectives, what they're arguing for. And I think it's a healthier way of approaching truth and seeing the world, having a healthier worldview with it, grounded on reality.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I think that the cultural Marxist is very grounded on subjective truth, and there is no idea of objective truth. And I think that's what really makes your worldview very confusing and easily manipulative. Whereas when you're grounded on truth, I ultimately believe God is truth, right? So when you're grounded on God, it really...
It's undeniable.
Yeah.
The reason why it's like that is because it's a means to an end. Cultural Marxism is just a means to an end. That's why the end is communism. So, but you said a lot of very interesting things. I think one of the things that really jumped out to me in your story right now is that the dichotomy that you described, right? We got the whole story of you in elementary, middle school, high school, and then in college, and you're being told these things by these academic institutions. And the moment you start self-researching and looking up for yourself and self-learning, right? And doing your own research, the whole world opens to you and you start understanding the truth again.
Yep.
So it's very, in the pendulum swing that you described, that's absolutely normal. I think a lot of people, whenever you're like on an extreme and then you hear about the other extreme, you end up going to that. And then and then everybody ends up moving to the moderate, right? Which is like 85% of Americans fall in the middle. They're moderate. That's why whenever the saying goes, whenever you're running on a primary, if you're a candidate, you run to the fringes because that's the base. But then when you run for the general election or the major election, you run moderate.
Interesting.
Right? That's because it's how you win.
Yeah.
Most people are moderate. They're in the middle, and maybe they're slightly to the left on some values. Maybe they're more like socially liberal, but fiscally conservative, or they're fiscally conservative and fiscally liberal, but and socially conservative. Yep. Depends. That spectrum is like, but it's a bell curve, right? And what ended up happening is we allowed the people on the far extreme of the bell curve to dictate culture.
Yep.
For the last 15, 20 years. And they've gone unchecked. And they've been able to get the culture to a point where the conversations that we're having right now is, kids are getting transed. Like, what are you talking about?
This point?
Like, how do we, this is like 15, 20 years ago, anybody who talked about that topic in favor of it, straight up, you're a pedophile. I don't care what your perspective is. You're a pedophile. If you're thinking about a kid's sexuality and they're under 18 and you're talking to them, incentivizing them to take hormones so they can transition, you're a groomer, you're a fucking pedophile. I don't care. There wasn't any wiggle room. There wasn't any gray area in the middle. You're 12, you shouldn't be transitioning. You're 17, you shouldn't be transitioning. Obviously, Nick Schultz disagrees with the 17-year-olds being sexualized, but it just happened yesterday. I don't know if you're familiar. This whole thing happened. Yeah, we don't have to talk about it right now. But yeah, the Democrat agenda is really about undermining the country, and your story really shows, how the plan is laid out in somebody's life, and how they unknowingly, from that little experience in an elementary school, that where the seed is planted, and what the end point is, with you in your car having the existential crisis, having these dark thoughts seep into your head, and you realizing, I have to make a change because I'm caught up in this life, which it doesn't feel like it's the umbrella of the state causing this, because in America we have freedoms, but it's especially in California, where we've been living under one party rule for the last 30 years. If California were its own country, it would be the equivalent of Venezuela. Not economically in other respects, but this is a dictatorship that we have. It's it's
the most tyrannical state.
It's a tyrannical state. Yes, they've had a majority in the state assembly. They've had most mayoral offices around the state, most of the most meaningful ones, like the mayor of Los Angeles. They run. It's nonpartisan. But Karen Bass,
come on,
it's supposed to be nonpartisan. But Karen Bass is clearly a Democrat. She was going down to get trained by Fidel Castro on how to run communist operations. Right. This is who's leading the country. Right. This is who we have, like legit communists, right? And they do it with a smile, and that's why people buy into it, right? And we have to save as many people as possible who are finding themselves in the same position as you were just a few years ago. Because I've been in that car, I've been in that situation as well, and during college, right? Having to battle these ideas, right? And the situation didn't get any better because the culture just ended up moving further and further and further left. And you're a dude and you're just trying to get by, right? And things aren't going your way because you had this great recession and you had this and that, and you're getting told all these messages about how your life is awful because now you live in America, right? And America's bad and it's evil. It's working against you. What are you talking about, right? And you end up, whether you like it or not, absorbing this messaging, and nothing good comes out of it, right? So I think it's important that we hear stories like yours, that we have these kinds of conversations, because that's the only way we're going to change something. You shouldn't feel guilty for being a man. Okay, you shouldn't feel guilty or bad for being a person of faith, for being Christian, right? For believing in God, believing in a being who loves you regardless and is here to save you. That's the coolest shit in the world. Yeah. I don't care what you.
God's awesome. Yeah.
God's the best, dude. Yeah. I don't care what you say, what anybody says about God, right? Christ gets so misrepresented so many times, and you look at all the miracles he did. It's the coolest shit. He went to weddings and turned water to wine.
It doesn't get cooler than that.
Exactly. It's like, bro, you got this guy here who's just helping everybody have a good time.
Yeah.
Right?
I wanted to really, if there's one thing that I learned from my experience, is the fallacy of authority, right? That we put too much trust in our doctors and scientists or professors, right? But I do believe that a lot of them are using their authority
for political means.
For their own means, right? Yeah. It may be political, it may just be selfish, but they're using their authority, right? And I learned that in my job at the osteoporosis holistic clinic, because a lot of these older people, it's unfortunate, but a lot of them were very bitter about the world or about life, right? Because people that have osteoporosis are around 50 and older, right? So these are older people, right? Or I remember there was a couple, this older couple, maybe their 70s, 80s, and they were a very cute couple. But they were telling me how disappointed they were with their retirement, that they expected that Social Security was going to be more, and now they're struggling financially. And they give us this idea that, you know, go to college, go work, or get a job based off your major, and then keep working till you're 67 years old so you can retire, and that's your financial plan. That's life. And I think that's furthest from the truth. That's not what God says.
Yeah.
But I bring this up because I started to realize, well, actually, there was also a handful of older people that were happy with life, right? They weren't the richest, but they were getting by, and there was one in particular who her passion was art, and she said that she was happy that she retired and now she can finally do art because that's all she wanted to do, like her life, right? Or we have this other couple where they both retired, both architects, which I thought was awesome. And they finally had time to study courses about chemistry or biology, right? My point is that those people had more wisdom, I realized. I like to talk to all of them, right? But when I talk to the happier individuals that were happy about the small things, I realized they had more wisdom. And then when I had the people who would just complain about life, right? It was just that's all the conversation was about. I tried to turn it into something positive.
And they would just go back.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about them?
Yeah.
The people who had more wisdom and were happier? Do they have some aspect of faith in their life? Did you ever ask that?
Yeah. They believed in God.
And the people who didn't?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. I don't fully know. But probably not. But that to me just showed that there's this misconception that just because they're older or just because someone's older, that's wisdom. But that's not fully true.
Yeah.
Because there's older people that are not wise yet. Wisdom comes from trial and error, from learning.
I have to disagree with you on that.
What would you say?
Wisdom comes from God, no one else.
Well, yeah.
That's it. God teaches you all the wisdom you need. I mean, you look in the Bible, Solomon, he didn't know, God was telling him all the wisdom he had came from God. And the moment that God, the moment that he turned on God, all that wisdom was gone.
I can't disagree with that. God is wisdom. The Bible is the wisest.
I mean, you read the book of Proverbs. I mean, I don't know how anybody can read the book of Proverbs and not be blown away with the wisdom in that book. You know, I mean, it's all over the Bible, but there's so many different examples. But you were mentioning people being older and not having wisdom, and there is that aspect that we talked about God. But there's a very simple thing that reminded me of this. I had an improv coach years ago. And he put it the simplest way possible, right? Because I think somebody asked, like one of the students asked him, was like, well, I've seen people do improv for 10 years and they still suck, right? And he said, well, it doesn't mean because you've been doing it for 10 years that you've been doing it the right way, or that you learn the right skills or the right habits. It's the same thing with life.
Yep.
Sometimes, and especially if you stray away from God, you're walking away from the tools and the handbook and the network of people who are a part of that, who are going to help you and will enrich your life, right? God has given us basically a guidebook, right? That's what the Bible is. It's what all the stories in the Bible are. It's an understanding of life and how to take life. And everybody who's part of that community, you have an understanding that we're all in this together and we're all helping each other. And that's why you see most of these nonprofits, they're usually Christian organizations or religious organizations. You very rarely see, these nonprofits or organizations that help people without asking anything in return, not be religious, right?
Yeah, I'll finish my point with the authority, right? That I realized that a lot of these people didn't have the wisdom that I was craving, and that. I think it's just common sense. You look and you're like, I don't want to end up like that. And so what this is, that's the way I saw it.
It's funny.
But I kind of thought, what decisions did they make in their life that led up to that point, right? And so it was just clear to me. I was like, okay, I don't want to end up like that. And the other thing was also during COVID. That's a whole big topic, right? But just to make my point, during COVID, I was in kinesiology, which is the science department. All the authorities were pushing the vaccine and not questioning it.
Oh yeah.
And to me, it's like I was young. I didn't know. I'm like, oh, the authorities, they must know, especially they're in science, so they know what the science says, right? There was questionable things, though. God multiple times told me not to take it. I ignored it, but it's because I wasn't strong in my faith. I sincerely believed that if I was closer in my faith, God was communicating with me. He gave me multiple signs that something was off here. But again, I fell for the fallacy of authority because, my teacher or my professors were saying it was safe and effective. So I was like, okay. Plus, CSUN required it.
A lot of places required it.
And so my point is that there's just this idea that we should follow what the authority says, but I disagree with that. I think we're better off judging people based off their merit in conversations, right? I would rather talk to a college dropout, but maybe he's educated or he learns and stuff, or a business owner, right? He has lots of experience. My point is that the substance of the conversation is what gives me the opinion, not a degree. Like, oh, you graduated from Harvard. Oh, okay. I automatically think you're, a genius.
Yeah. Well, everything you just said is the most American thing I've heard so far. It really is. This country started in opposition to oppressive ideas. And some of that, the last straw was the tea tax. But a lot of it was like, hey, you don't get to tell me how to live over here. You don't understand that, and kind of having that independent thought, right? And it's not necessarily rebellion from God, right? It's embracing what God has given us and just living a life that's, grounded in reality and common sense.
Yep.
So, Alex, thank you so much for sitting down. This was a great conversation.
Thanks for having me, Dennis.
I feel like I could talk to you for like 3 more hours.
Yeah, same here, man. But yeah, great conversation, Dennis.
Yeah. If you want to plug your socials, if you want to look into that camera and tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so my personal account is just Salmextex, SALMEXTEX. Hopefully, soon I'll be creating a dedicated content creating.
And what
page.
Platforms is that?
That's on Instagram.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Salmextex.
Yeah, Salmextex.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Alex.
Thank you.